Hello, my name is Lauren Francis Evans, and I'm sharing with you today a paper that I presented at the 2019 CAA conference as part of a panel on maternal subjectivity and contemporary art. This paper is called How We Are Fed, Artist Mothers and the Online Community. Just a month or so after giving birth, on a visit home to see family in Atlanta, I found myself in the High Museum with my new infant in tow. That day, I noticed painting after painting of women with one breast exposed and was overwhelmed with an entirely new sense of appreciation and understanding. Of course, I'd seen these paintings and many like them before, and perhaps like most on visits prior, might have scuttled past with a muffled giggle or even a scoff. But that was before I had become a mother. On this afternoon at the museum, I suddenly felt myself intensely identifying with these women, because I too spent most of my day with one breast out as I fed my daughter on demand, including that very day while wandering throughout the museum. A few months later, on a visit to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, my husband caught us in the act and snapped this photo. Notice that rather than share this image on Instagram as I did the others, I shared it in a closed Facebook group for breastfeeding mothers. As a new breastfeeding mother, this group was my lifeline. With eagerness, I'd read every single post as it came through my newsfeed and would devour all of the articles shared on the page. This was my safe space. This is where I could ask for support without fear of being judged, where I could confidently share photos like this, where I was reassured on a daily basis that I wasn't alone. This is one of the many ways I've been fed thus far as a mom. The fact that mothers are finding support in online communities is nothing new. Mommy blogging has proliferated since the early 2000s, and many women, myself included, find daily support in private Facebook groups on various parenting topics. But I would like to suggest today that we are beginning to see a new emergence of support specifically for artist mothers through the development of similar platforms created by mothers for mothers in response to a lack of institutional support within the current art world. Throughout this presentation, I will weave in personal anecdotes and share how my own experience of becoming a mother has wound its way into my creative work and research. Alongside images of my own work, I will unpack some of the ideas that are influencing my own research in maternal intersubjectivity, placental thinking, and myths of cosmic origin, suggesting that these types of online communities can function as a new kind of symbolic center for artist mothers, nourishing us like a placenta nourishes an unborn child. Several days after the birth of our daughter, my husband returned to the hospital to retrieve the placenta, which we had left behind in the flurry of newness and fatigue. The attendant at labor and delivery didn't ask for his name or our date of delivery. She just retrieved a white plastic tub marked, "Placenta will go home with patient," and handed it over to him, as if it were the only afterbirth awaiting pickup. That seems likely, as in most hospital births, the placenta is discarded immediately after exiting the mother's body. Call it curiosity, call it creative research. I just wanted to hold on to it for a while, to inspect it, poke at it, and learn from it somehow. As a sculptor, I am intrigued by the materiality of the flesh and believe it to function as a microcosm that points to various aspects of the immaterial human experience. Years before ever becoming pregnant, I was already fascinated by the spiritual and ontological significance of the human belly button and its relationship to the creative act. As a child, I pulled at mine, trying to flip it inside out. Years later, as a graduate student, I poured plaster into it regularly, making castings of its negative space. The belly button is the first mark that life leaves upon the body. It is a scar that points to our origins. Many creation myths describe our world as originating from a central point. The Greek term omphalos, or navel, can refer to various symbolic centers that are believed to connect the earthly and the divine. Just as the human belly button marks our connection to and inevitable separation from our mothers, these so-called navels of the world are often associated with myths of cosmic origin, functioning as physical markers of the very sites at which our Earth was supposedly born into existence. This symbolism can be found across cultures and religions, as well as other such manifestations you see pictured here. I'm excited and inspired by the navel, umbilical cord, and placenta as both sites and symbols of the simultaneity that is embedded in the human experience. Questions of origin and existence are constantly shaping how I think about my creative work, and my belief is that the work of the artist is primarily ontological. In the act of making, we participate in the creative act, in the ongoing shaping of being. In the natural and home birth community, it's not so shocking for a woman to keep her baby's placenta. Placenta encapsulation, a process whereby the placenta is dried, ground up, and made into pills, has recently grown in popularity, and many women claim there are benefits to consuming their nutrient and hormone-rich placentas in the weeks after giving birth, praising it for helping with lactation and easing postpartum depression. Alternatively, some women choose to bury their placentas, a ceremonial act that honors the organ for its role in creating and sustaining new life. In her essay, Placental Thinking, Nene Jordan considers contemporary and traditional uses of the human afterbirth, arguing that in claiming and honoring the placenta, we can come to better understand the sacredness of birth and the gift of life that mothers bring. Through what she calls placental thinking, Jordan suggests that we extend the metaphor of the placenta. Like the grand communicator, she explains, the placenta and umbilical cord define the paradox of the two bodies' connection and separation. As you may notice, this sculpture strikingly resembles my daughter's belly button, particularly in its rawness following the recent detachment of her umbilical stump. It has become customary practice in our current culture for fathers to cut the umbilical cord. The cutting of the cord is touted by some as a first rite of fatherhood, a way for a dad to participate in the birthing process and to bond with the baby upon his or her arrival. But my baby's father didn't cut the cord. I did. Throughout the pregnancy, I became increasingly convinced that I ought to be the one to take that first step in our becoming two. In the act of cutting the cord, I acknowledged the personhood of my daughter apart from myself, which I continue to wrestle with to this day. In her essay, Placental Thinking, Jordan describes the mother's breast as an external placenta. When the cord is cut, the mother and child are no longer connected by the vine of flesh and blood. The woman's womb is no longer the child's home, but she quickly learns that her body still belongs to the child. Breastfeeding the child is just the next step in the slow, drawn-out process of becoming two. The child feeds on his or her mother, relying on her breasts for their life-giving sustenance, connected to her, latched for the greater portion of that first year. In addition to their functional similarities, the placenta and breast can also be likened in their appearance. The tree of life has become a rich symbol for both, used throughout many natural and holistic birthing communities, to resemble the complex network of vessels and the dynamic interchange of life-giving substance between the mother and child. Often, the doulas and midwives who offer placental encapsulation will also make prints with the organ, pressing it onto paper to create an impression resembling the tree of life. Likewise, as part of a recent fad, some women took breastfeeding selfies and then superimposed an image of the tree of life on top of their so-called brelfies. In the nursing relationship, the mother and child experience an entanglement of selfhood and identification with the other. Particularly in the early months, the mother who exclusively breastfeeds her baby will find it extremely difficult to be apart from her child for more than a few hours at a time. If she is apart any longer, her breasts will become engorged with milk, leaking and soaking her clothes as her body reminds her that her child needs her. I get nauseated just thinking about how my entire body ached that first time I was away from my daughter for longer than expected. I was excited to be away from her, to finally assert my independence from her, but I soon learned how badly I still needed her, my body physically in pain, longing for her presence. Before becoming a mother, I always thought of attachment and separation as psychologies experienced by the child. I didn't realize until experiencing it firsthand that not unlike the blood circulating through the umbilical cord and placenta, these psychologies very much go both ways. I've been thinking a lot of this entanglement. At times, I imagine vividly that my daughter and I are still connected by this cord. It's a tug of war. Often, I tug at the cord, longing for my independence from her, and more often than not, she tugs to bring me closer, unwilling to let me exist apart from her. I've come to see these sculptures as transitional objects in more ways than one. As soft plush forms, they resemble pillows or stuffed animals, which often serve as the first surrogates for the mother figure and the young child. Made from images of actual umbilical cords, they are also literal manifestations of the shared conduit between mother and child. Twisted and knotted, they speak to the complexity of this relationship and entangled self-identification with the other. Author Jane Lazar confronts this entanglement in her fiercely honest and compelling 1976 memoir about early motherhood, The Mother Knot, a feminist classic that remains extremely relevant to this day. She says, "After only several days of his life, we both felt that the breast was his. As he drew the milk out of me, my inner self seemed to shrink into a very small knot, gathering intensity under a protective shell, moving away, further and further away from the changes being wrought by this child, who was at once separate and a part of me. Frightened that he would claim my life completely, I desperately tried to cling to my boundaries. Yet I held him very close, stroked his skin, imagined that we were still one person." My 2.5-year-old, still nursing, is only just now beginning to understand that my breasts don't belong exclusively to her. Many women, particularly in North America, wean their babies long before they are ever able to make this distinction, before they even learn that their mothers are themselves separate entities. Soon after becoming familiar with the fantastic and impressively comprehensive Instagram page called Breastfeeding Art, I used their hashtag on a post of my own. In it, I am nursing my daughter in front of a painting of the nursing Madonna in yet another museum. Notice my daughter is much older, a toddler here, around 19 months old, a year since I had shared that first Brelfie in the closed Facebook group. Knowing that a page such as this existed and that it had such a following gave me the confidence to share this photo publicly on my own page. Shortly thereafter, it was reposted on the Breastfeeding Art page and quickly received more than 2,000 likes. I know that it may sound silly or shallow, but I have to admit that all of a sudden I really felt that I was a part of something, not only amongst this community of other breastfeeding mothers online, but with all of the mothers that have come before us. When I think about weaning, of the impending end to our nursing relationship, I think often of Mary, so commonly depicted throughout art history with the Christ child at her breast. I imagine how much more intensely she must have felt the simultaneous letdown of attachment and separation, of becoming two, not only with her child, but also with her God. Simultaneous letdown occurs when both breasts release milk at the same time. This phrase has come to encapsulate much of the complexity of motherhood for me. The term letdown refers to the physiological response triggered by the release of oxytocin, the so-called love hormone that is produced when a baby begins suckling at the breast. During the letdown reflex, milk begins to flow more freely, often spraying with force. At times, even when the baby isn't nursing, an increase in oxytocin can cause a lactating woman to let down without warning, such as when she hears a baby cry or looks at a picture of her baby. Though not every mother experiences simultaneous letdown, I often did. Typically, when we say something is a letdown, we are expressing disappointment. I can't help but assume that this breastfeeding term must have been coined by a woman who experienced the simultaneous letdown that is becoming two. She must have known the paradoxical feeling of release, of holding on and letting go at the very same time. While my daughter grew inside of me, her presence became increasingly apparent as her movements became more and more visible. Astonished, I would capture these rolls and kicks with my phone, eventually amassing dozens of videos of my growing stomach. In transparent layers, these numerous videos now coalesce and loop to become one video projection called Indwelling. I think often of Mary, the mother of Christ. She experienced physically what Christ describes when he speaks of bearing fruit in the scriptures. He says, "Abide in me and I in you." And I imagine this indwelling he calls for can be known on this earth no better than in the maternal experience. Not only does the new life physically dwell in its mother's body, but the mother's blood pulses back and forth through the placenta and umbilical cord, in and out of the child's tiny developing flesh. I think often of Mary, imagining how much more boldly she must have felt this. What a lovely picture of how we too are fed. In attempts to wrap this all up, I'll continue to extend this metaphor of the placenta, likening all I've just described to the myriad ways I've been fed over the last 2.5 years since becoming Agnes's mom. While I was pregnant, I feasted upon the wealth of articles and resources on the Cultural Reproducers website and blog, which was founded by artist Krista Donner. Later, after struggling to piece together an her story, if you will, of artist mothers making work about their maternal experiences, I was thrilled to learn of the Artist Parent Index, created and managed by artist Sarah Irvin, which did for me just that. And just by following and using the Artist Residency in Motherhood and Breastfeeding Art hashtags, I have felt plugged into a lifeline of nourishment and support as my Instagram feed is filled with posts featuring mother artists on an ongoing basis, and I have ravenously consumed their work. As a Mother's Day gift to myself this past year, I self-declared my own artist residency in motherhood, following in the footsteps of many women who have already done the same. The initiative, or perhaps you might even call it a movement, was established by artist Lenka Clayton as a self-directed, open-source artist residency designed to empower and inspire artists who are also mothers. As the website explains, you don't have to apply, it doesn't cost anything, it's fully customizable, and you can be in residence for as long as you choose. An artist residency in motherhood is the reframing of parenthood as a valuable site for creative practice rather than an obstruction to be overcome. My residency kicked off with some devoted, child-free time to read, research, reflect, and write. With an upcoming move and a publication deadline looming, I first focused my efforts on attempting to articulate many of the concepts I have shared with you today. The impending long-distance move prompted additional reflection and experimentation as I considered that placenta, which was still in my freezer, just chilling alongside nearly a gallon of pumped breast milk that would surely not survive the summer move. I felt an urgency to do something with it all. I bought a dehydrator and conducted all kinds of kitchen experiments with the breast milk, but I still had no clarity about what it ought to become. So yes, that placenta and the several bags of breast milk that remained moved to Alabama with us. Thawed and since refrozen, they still await an uncertain fate. But I find comfort knowing that the placenta is still close by. I like to imagine that when Agnes fully weans, if that day ever comes, we'll do something together to honor that placenta we once shared, and we'll ponder together how we nevertheless continue to feed and be fed by other means. So now I have a very brief addendum. I'm here today sharing these reflections with you because I crave so badly to be part of this community of scholars, makers, and procreators. It's why I'm hosting a roundtable discussion to discuss matters about which I am particularly hungry for mentorship and support. I hope some of you will come. It's because of this hunger I am chairing a panel at CCAC this fall because I'm craving so badly your insights on the topic. I hope that some of you will contribute. And it's the reason just last week, while I was editing this paper late one night, that I decided to create a new online network specifically for this niche community of artist parent academics. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.